All kinds of stuff that they have. And he specializes
Ding, 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 ding. Well, I don't have a teacher's bell to ring tonight, so I guess I'll just improvise a bit. But welcome to the group tonight. We're so glad to have you here. And if you give me a moment of acquiescence, I will say a couple of words and sit down and shut up. Tom and Susan are off in Chicago, in good old hometown tonight. I do believe they're celebrating his birthday, number 78. His is about a month ahead of mine. He and I and one other person who no longer comes to the group were born in about a 3-month time span. So I'm glad that he is, after having a stroke, it gave him some problems, and he worked hard and recovered from most all of that, fortunately. He's able to do almost everything now and has enjoyed a good long life, and we hope he has a happy birthday, and we'll welcome them back next week. So, in all the 9 years that I've been assisting Tom with the group, I have never memorized his opening rhetoric. So guess what? You don't get it tonight. But we welcome everyone who's here tonight. If anyone is here tonight for first time and they would like to get the meeting notices, I need you to give me your name and your email address on a piece of paper, and we'll get that in. I'll get Tom to get that into the computer. He maintains the database. We tried both doing it, and they never were the same. The wonders of computers, well, the wonders of people trying to work with computers are imperfect, of course. So Tom maintains that, and we'll be glad to send you meeting notices on who the speakers are. Normally, I would read off the topics for at least the next couple of weeks, but I went off and left a folder with the meeting notices on my desk this morning. I apologize. My senior year blaming, I guess I'll say. I was senile this morning, but I went off and left those. And normally they'll have a stack up on the counter. Well, people took them this week, so there are none on the counter, so I have none to give out. So we are booked up through the end of the year. We will take off the Friday preceding Thanksgiving on the premise that some people will either be out of town or they will have family in from out of town and they don't want to come and sit and endure and participate in a meeting of this sort.
Yeah, I believe that's Saturday the 24th that we won't be here.
Saturday 24, that sounds right. Yeah, the last, whatever, 4th Thursday in November is Thanksgiving. So the Saturday following that. So we won't look forward to seeing you then, but we are then booked up. I guess it's maybe the first 3 Saturday nights in December. And then we'll take off a couple of weeks for the holidays, for Christmas, and for Thanksgiving, for New Year's. Yeah. And then we will reconvene. So that's the layout for the immediate future anyway. And Tom did a good job finding speakers for all the rest of the year so he can take off, go out of town, celebrate the birthday,
2nd of December,
and not feel like he had a cloud hanging over his shoulders. Tonight we're treated to have John Beesley come and speak to us again. And
so it's going to be 24th.
He's going to talk to us about a person whose name we hear mentioned. We've heard it mentioned all of our life, if we have much life, but in the recent past, we've heard it discussed more often, particularly by people under age 30 who don't have the frigging vaguest idea who he is or what he represents. I'm sorry to say that word, but the professors they have in college have not really painted them an accurate picture of Brother Karl and his friend. And I've read their books, much to my disdain. It's kind of hard reading. It's not something you want to just say in nursery rhymes. And but he had, I know all the points John is going to make. I have a few. I'll save those to the end of the conversation tonight if he don't cover what I've got thinking on my mind about it. But he was a very complex person. He was very unique in the early industrial, if I can say it, revolution days of England, to which he had immigrated, to come in and point out some of the evils of the capitalists who had put together enough money to build expensive factories and hire former farm workers to come in and enjoy a different sort of life. I can't say they enjoyed it, but they had it anyway. And he saw the flaws in it. He thought the people were going to take over the world, and there would be no corrupt people running the world. Fortunately, human nature doesn't work that way. And in time, we've been able to work a lot of that out. And I'm sure John will do an excellent job of portraying the original concepts and how they played out over time. And when he finishes, we'll have an opportunity to ask him questions from the floor. We have a cordless mic to do that for those of you who have not been here before. And then we give each person who wants to do it 5 minutes to come in and make their comment about the subject, not about the Dallas Cowboys or some other subject. If we could probably do that, couldn't we? But you can come up and make your comments, and then John will come up and offer his response to our comments and close the meeting down, and we will declare it finished by hopefully or sometime around 9 o'clock. So does anybody have any important announcements they want to make? I can't see crap looking out over this light with my limited vision, but does anybody have a comment?
Jim, I'm only commenting, I'll have invitations for you, but I'm doing my usual Christmas Day open house.
Christmas Day open house. I'm going to be off out of town with family and can't go, but I would encourage any of you to go if you can. It's utter hospitality, and I assure you, you will enjoy it. You'll enjoy the setting in the high rise, and you'll enjoy the hospitality of your hostess. I can't say the word so I can. The hospitality of your hostess. I don't use that phrase every day, so I had to work at it.
And Jim,
Yes, ma'am.
people do bring dishes.
Yeah.
You have
Oh,
lots-
yes.
lots
It's
of
a-
food there.
Yeah, the place is provided, and liquids I think will be provided perhaps.
And I
But
usually have meat from Dickie's, but we always welcome more food.
Yeah.
bring the veggies. She's got meat from Dickie's.
Not me.
Man, you can't hardly beat that. Sorry, I'm gonna miss it. But I hope you enjoy it. And without further ado, does anybody else have an announcement? Silence? Well, John, come on up and take the podium.
Well, thank you all for coming. There seems to be a lot of interested parties, so I hope I entertain you appropriately. So tonight I'm going to talk about Karl Marx. He's mentioned a lot, but I don't think he's understood a lot, so I shall try to enlighten you as much as I can. So Karl Marx lived from 1818 to 1883, age 65. And so basically Marx was a philosopher, a scholar, an active organizer, and a propagandist. Certainly I think the last was what his greatest achievement was, really propagandizing. He was born in the Rhineland district of Germany, and then later on he went to University of Berlin. Initially he studied law. And then somehow he got interested in Hegelian philosophy. So you ask, well, what is Hegelian philosophy? Well, George Hegel conceived of an all-powerful state based on observation, reason, and logic. And of course, this notion was really the foundation of both fascism and communism. And of course, somewhat like 100 years later, George Orwell, who lived around the corner from me in Canterbury, London for a time, wrote Animal Farm. And he basically saw no difference between the two totalitarian systems, that's to say fascism and communism. They're both undemocratic and thoroughly undesirable. So this Hegelian logic really was the forerunner of that system. So he started, he wanted to teach this Hegelian philosophy from a left-wing viewpoint. And so he dreamed of being a university lecturer in Berlin. Well, his dreams were dashed because the Minister of Education, Prussia, banned the whole thing. So he had to leave university and take up writing. And so naturally, he started on a magazine that was a left-wing magazine. And he eventually rose to become the editor of the magazine until he drew the attention of the Prussian authorities. And so they banned him and asked him to leave. So he left for Paris in 1843 rather, where he joined Friedrich Engel, who was to be his collaborator through the rest of his life. And so again they started up a left-wing magazine in Paris. And after 2 years, that was shut down because the Prussian authorities made it known that it was a subversive thing to have being published in Paris. And so he left Paris and went to Brussels. And there in Brussels, he collaborated with Engels and wrote the Communist Manifesto, which actually the authorities in Brussels didn't like either. So in 1845, he set off for London. And in those years, London was a far more tolerant place where he could do his work. And he stayed there until the rest of his life, actually living in London. And so, anyway, he earned his living by freelance writing, and lived in a fair degree of penury, actually. So he didn't make a lot of money, and mostly he was subsidized by his pal Engels. And it was in the reading room of the British Museum Library that he wrote the 3 volumes of the Das Kapital over the years of 1867 to 1883. There was a chorus of approval for that, those bells, I suppose. And so, in fact, the last volume was published in 1883, the last year of his life. And so, he is in fact buried in Highgate Cemetery in London. There's a huge monument to him in Highgate. Highgate is a district about 2 or 3 miles from the centre of London, a fairly posh district with a famous school. Anyway, so that was basically his life. Now, then I'll now go on to talk about the Communist Manifesto. So what was this about? Well, it was far more than just about communism. In fact, actually, it begins with a review of socio-economic history. He reviews what the society was like and operated in ancient Rome. And then he talked about life and the operation in the Middle Ages. In fact, you see, both these societies were very highly stratified. So in the feudal society, for example, you had the lords at the top who owned all the land. And below them you had the vassals, the guild masters, journeymen, the apprentices, and at the bottom, the serfs. And so this was a highly structured society, but it was based on fealty and obligations both ways. And so in fact, even the serfs had some rights, and so if something happened and the master didn't really obey the prevailing culture, they'd be censured. Even the lord of the manor would be censured. So there was a two-way structured society where there were some obligations and responsibilities. So anyway, later on, so we came then to the mercantile age. And this happened because this discovery of the New World and the Eastern trade routes. And so the merchantman then became a wealthy class, actually somewhat surpassing the lords, because the lords owned the land, but they didn't own the modern machinery. And so as the need for goods exported around the world, and of course the Industrial Revolution started in England in the late 18th century, then gradually you had this agglomeration of capital, because this is what was needed to build the factories in the volume needed to produce the goods for the world. So that's how the capitalist system started. And in fact, I've talked about this before, about the so-called yeomen of England that had some rights in the countryside were driven off the land by enclosures because the factories, the textile factories, needed the wool from the sheep. And so the peasants, some of them actually were driven off the land to use the land for sheep, so they were driven into the towns to become the working people. And so what Marx said is that the various stratified class were actually compressed into two classes, what he called the bourgeois class that owned the means of production, and the proletariat class that actually were the workers who worked for the bourgeois class. And so the demand for concentrated capital really created this capital system as we know it. But this bourgeois class actually, in those days, in the middle of the 19th century, you only could vote if you owned a certain amount of capital and income. Most working people could not vote, and of course women couldn't vote either. And so the bourgeois class, of course, controlled things, actually captured the executive control of Parliament, and actually managed the affairs of to the common interest of the entire bourgeois class. And so in doing so, they destroyed this notion of fealty and mutual obligation that existed in feudal times. So the whole cultural structure was destroyed. And so anyway, so the bourgeois class, what now you call the capitalist class, exploited the worldwide market, and it gave a sort of a common cosmopolitan character to the production and consumption. And also, it agglomerated the population by forcing them together into ever larger towns. And so to operate, you had to have a uniformity of law, taxes, and institutions that grew up to support this new system. And so even in those days, you had regular crises where you had gluts and scarcity. So there was sort of boom and busts all the way through the 19th century. So in fact, what happened was that the lower strata of the middle classes, if you like, the smaller business people, couldn't compete with this agglomerated capital. So they were driven out of business, and obviously you see it today when Walmart comes to town. All the mom and pop stores are driven out of business. Well, this is what Marx observed in the 19th century. So basically, what was the sort of petite bourgeois, which my ancestors were driven to become the proletariat. because they no longer had enough money to survive as a bourgeois class. And so, in fact, there was the ranks of the proletariat were swollen because of this process. And what Marx said, he said he really, didn't blame the capitalist or the bourgeois, because this is just a natural process of the way competition works. And when it gets bigger and bigger and drives out competition, that's the way it works. So he said this is just a natural process you'd expect to happen. So he didn't condemn it, he just says this is what happens. And so initially, of course, the proletariat, of course, as the machines got more and more prevalent and proficient and efficient, it displaced working people. And there were many riots in the early 19th century where you had the machine breakers who would actually try and break the machines because they were obviously losing their livelihood. And they weren't. In the old days, of course, many of these people were skilled, had skilled crafts. They were blacksmiths and so on and so forth. But in the new industrial age, you really just needed to know how to operate a machine. And so they were losing their livelihoods and so on, so they blamed the machines. That was a feature of life as it happened in those days. And so, but what happened was this agglomeration of people turned into a political rebellion where you had the formation of trades unions. They were called combinations at first, and they were banned at first, but gradually they became unions. Now, in fact, the bourgeois competition to operate nationally and internationally required a degree of education of the proletariat. And in fact, what Marx said was that the proletariat, being more educated, the bourgeois gave them weapons to fight against the bourgeois. He said that the proletariat would eventually gain control and overthrow the bourgeois, because the bourgeois have created their own grave diggers. So we always thought that the proletariat would rise up and rebel. And so what was the immediate aims? This is what Marx wrote. What were the immediate aims of communists in the Communist Manifesto? Was really to form the proletariat as a coherent class that would overthrow the supremacy of the bourgeois and gain political power for themselves. So property ownership, as it wasn't prohibited, only the control of it by the bourgeois. And so what Marx saw was that capital is a collective product and one that has a social power. And so, under a capitalist system, the minimum wage is always the lowest wage that will sustain the existence and the reproduction of the species, of the human species. But it always will always be forced down to this minimum level. And so, what is the purpose of the laboring class? Well, it exists merely to create bourgeois capital. In fact, Marx said that all wealth really comes from the labors of the proletariat class. That's where wealth comes from. Because the people with money don't lend their money to get interest. No, they gain much more by owning the means of production. So it's a whole different scheme. And so, as I said, the old class became obsolete, and so the knowledge needed to run machines was minimal, and so women would replace men, and very often little children would replace women. And if you go to the exhibition of the mining areas, you'll see that the father would be down the mines, and his wife would be there, and little children would be there. in this hellish environment. So that was a sort of typical working environment in Victorian days, in the middle of the 19th century. So the Communist Manifesto had a 10-point plan that it was hoped would replace class antagonism, and where a system would give a free development to everybody, and that would increase harmony, which was obviously needed even today, but of course we won't see it. And so the plan itself has 10 points, and so it contains many progressive points, such as having a national credit bank, abolition of child labor, limits on inheritance, free education, and a graduated income tax. And so, but the totalitarian elements would be the state ownership of land, factories, communications, and transport. Now, going along politically at the same time in England, it was known as the Age of Reform, roughly from 1815 to 1870. And this blunted many of Marx's criticisms. But of course, the class conflict, which he talked about mostly, has never gone away. For example, a few years back, we had the 1% versus the 99%. And so the hope of harmony has never happened. And so the revolution that Marx predicted in Victorian industrial society did not take place, largely because there were just enough reforms to forestall it. For example, trade unions were allowed, and out of trade unions came the Labour Party, which is a party that really does support the working people. Unlike here, there's never been a Labour Party. You will basically have two right-wing parties. And so, of course, this revolution that Marx predicted would happen, in fact, it did happen, but it happened in the feudal society of Tsarist Russia, which gave rise to a totally repressive totalitarian state. And that is the ugly part. So it happened in a very backward state. In fact, actually, the 30s was a crisis of the clash between fascism and communism, basically both totalitarian systems. So anyway, that was the essence of the Communist Manifesto. It has some progressive parts, but by and large, it was a forerunner of totalitarian system. So then we come to the Das Kapital. What did that say? That came later, 1867 to 1883. And so Marx's economic theory really has the dominant theme of it. It contains a social content. Whereas if you read classical economics, Adam Smith, there's virtually no social comment at all. But there was an individual called Thomas Malthus who did introduce a social theme in his book called Essay on Population, and that was late of the 18th century, in fact, 1798. And he said that the poorest had only themselves to blame by their being in poverty because they were overproducing themselves. And so Marx, in the first volume, attacks that notion that the poor are always to blame. And he said that basically what was happening was that the machines were becoming more and more productive, driven by the pressures of competition. And that the working people, of course, were paid only a fraction of the value of production. So, for example, if you could sell something, say, for 100%, the production cost would be 70%, and so the remaining 30% would be the profits, or what Marx called the surplus value. And so now we come to consider what's called the labor theory of value. Now, value is different from the price, because really what the theory of value is, what is its intrinsic value? And the way the classical economists stated it, Adam Smith and David Ricardo, that they did believe that labor was a source of value, that what effort went into it was a source of value. But Marx's point was that the labor that went into it is the only source of value. So how did he arrive at that? Well, he said basically the costs of production has three components. It has buildings and machinery, but he said in terms of their cost, in fact, it diminishes because in fact these things are used up, and you use depreciation of these machines as part of the cost, so their value is really diminished. And of course the input materials are totally consumed. And he said it's only labor that produces more value than is actually paid in wages. And so his theory was that it's the wages that create this surplus value, and that actually creates wealth. It's this accumulation of surplus value by the proletariat that creates wealth. That wouldn't be there if you just gave your money like on a bond for a small interest rate, like today it's about 2-3%. And so this accumulation of surplus value that creates wealth is the only reason why the labor is hired. And so what is the rate of profit in such a system? Well, it's this surplus value or profit divided by the production costs. And so the production costs comprise wages plus the materials plus this depreciation which I've just discussed. So basically it's the profits divided by the cost of production, and that's easy to understand. But what Marx was interested in is how the combination of surplus value and wages, because basically they're both variables. Obviously if you pay less, then the surplus value is bigger. And that was one of his main contentions. Now, what Marx said was the competitive pressure brought upon by these newer and newer machines that were continuously appearing would drive more and more of the surplus value into buying more and more machines, because there would be this competition between producers, and so they would have to buy more machines to stay in business, because you have a more efficient machine, you see. And so because you'd be continually buying more and more efficient machines, you'd be continuously displacing workers, because obviously the machine, you'd be more efficient and you'd lay off people, obviously. And so Marx said that doing this on a continuous basis, continually displacing workers, you always have this so-called reserve army of unemployed. And so because you had this reserve army of unemployed, wages would always remain at the subsistence level. And so Marx, one of his more famous statements, said that the capitalist system always gave the appearance of a surplus population, because there was always unemployment. It's just the nature of the system. And of course, in today's world, it's the Federal Reserve that controls the size of this population, surplus population. But today there's a surplus population. Even though it's claimed to be, 3.8%, well, it's more than double that, really. So you always have this surplus population. Now, in the 50s in England, unemployment was 1%. So it can be a lot lower, in fact. And so, just as a side note, the current minimum wage is $7.25 an hour. And for waitress and wait person, wait staff, it's $2.13 an hour, which is well below subsistence level. So even today, we're operating at subsistence level. So it turns out that the rate of profit that I just mentioned earlier in the 19th century was gradually falling. And classical economists such as Ricardo and so on, well, said that the reason for this is the fact that agriculture has lower productivity, and therefore, and in fact, if you look at the reasons why you have a rising supply curve, where you have supply demand crossing a balance, and they say, well, it's because the farmers have to introduce more and more marginal land, and that will put up the price of vegetables and produce and so on. And Marx said, no, it's not true. What will happen is you'll have industrial farming, and therefore the price of agricultural products will also come down as well, which is true. Because we have agro-business, and you have fertilizers and machinery and all the rest of it. We have very many fewer farmers than we have ever had. And so basically, Marx said, no, the reason why the profits were falling is because the pressure of competition means that the actual costs, because you're buying all these machines, is rising faster than this surplus value. Basically, the prices were falling faster than the costs, and this is why this was happening. And so basically, that was what he said. I think it's basically true. So, of course, Marx could never conceive that real wages would rise above subsistence level. But in fact, it did happen in the so-called Trente Glorieuses that I talked about before, 1945 to 75. Real wages did grow in line with GDP. But after that, and it basically grew because of trade union power. But of course that didn't suit the elite. And so this trend reversed. And in fact, especially after 2008, we've seen the gig economy rise, where people kind of are basically now not the proletariat, but the precariat, where wages and jobs are just precarious and don't pay much. And so people are being more and more thrust into that situation. And as an example, I have a tenant, a pediatric nurse, who looks after the most disabled children, in fact one in particular. She had a working week of 48 hours, let's see, 40 hours plus 8 hours overtime. Her company was taken over, and she was told, well, you're now going to have only 32 hours. So basically, she was supporting herself and her sister, and so she can't make it on that. So I think there is Victorian times of return. And so, of course, as we see, since 1980, we've seen the rise of oligopolies, as I say, near monopolies, and cartels. And this means that prices can indeed rise faster than costs. So, of course, this destroys Marx's case, because he believed this couldn't happen. But it can happen when you have near monopolies, because they control the price. And if you look at what's been happening to drugs, recently, you can see what's happening. And goodness only knows where the ingredients come from, because the farmer won't tell you. It basically comes from India and China. Because we must destroy the FDA because it's government. It can't have government controlling anything. Because the market can take care of things. Well, good luck on that one. Anyway, the other thing that Marx said was talk about capitalist instability. So what were his arguments? Well, the main one was that basically there are two components or compartments. There's the production compartment and the demand compartment. And he said because this is sort of not controlled, of course it wouldn't in the free market, it's very difficult to get these two into optimum balance. And so what this does mean, you have a recurring gluts and scarcity. And so, and of course this is made worse because we have increasing agglomeration with larger and larger companies doing this. And so we saw this in the banking system, which is connected worldwide, and when one went down, the whole damn thing went down. And so, you know, he was certainly on the ball with that one. But he said that basically what would happen would be you'd have this increasing agglomeration of capital. The wages would be depressed at starvation level, and you'd have the increasing immiseration of this swelling army of the unemployed. And that would give rise to a revolution. And so we're looking at America, since 1980, we've seen downturns roughly every 8 years. Each one's almost worse than the last. And it took the total greed of the unregulated speculative madness in the financial system to bring about the 2008 crash that we've not got out of even yet. And so Marx actually accepted Say's laws, which of course Keynes disproved, which said that the supply creates its own demand, and therefore the system will automatically recover. Well, Keynes disproved this in the 1930s. In fact, America didn't recover for 10 years, and it took the massive fiscal stimulus in World War II to bring back America back into business. So the system can crash and stay crashed at a high unemployment rate. In fact, you can look across Europe with massive unemployments right across southern Europe now, especially in Greece, Spain, Italy, and so on. Because they're a neo-capitalist system, in fact, driven by the Germans. And so basically, so the bad part, really, we've had the ugly part, was totalitarian systems. The bad part was that Marx's theories really was a special case, okay, of declining profitability causing this immiseration. But you see, now we had Keynes, which can prevent that happening if you have the political will to make it happen. So Marx was wrong about that. So you could say that was the bad part. So this immiseration, you see, has not been sufficient to cause this revolution because, in fact, just in the 2008 crash, we had a huge fiscal stimulus of about nearly $1 trillion, and that was enough to pump up the economy. Because we're not on the gold standard, so we can just print the money and pump it up again. So you must have a monetary system and a fiscal system that works together, but you can revive a crashed economy. And with the system that we have, you will always have crashes. And right now, we're well overdue for another one. And this pumping up the economy, as Trump has done, at the wrong time, and causing another huge fiscal deficit, federal government deficit, I mean, it's There's a bad ending coming. So then, of course, we're going to come on to global trade. And of course, global trade in the 19th century was in full swing in the old British Empire. But of course, they were under the gold standard, and therefore, this maintained a economic equilibrium. You couldn't run a trade surplus and deficit under a gold system. It couldn't happen by the nature of the way it worked. I have talked about, gave a talk about this in the past. It's not possible. But now with free floating exchange rates, it can happen, it does happen. And so, you know, as I say, Trump is not entirely wrong. He's got the right observation, but not the right policies. And so, so now we have a current free-for-all, which is totally unbalanced. It's based on subsistent wages in foreign lands, basically called labor arbitrage. And so what you do, America's been doing, is basically selling your capital assets and giving away your intellectual property to buy these so-called cheap imports. Now, it's not something that a pragmatic Marx could possibly ever have imagined any capitalist would do. But then, of course, he's never met modern American capitalists, who I think have a somewhat deficiency in the intellectual department, to say the least. So what's the conclusion of all of this? Well, I think greed, corruption, and stupidity, in somewhat equal measures, has driven the system in the UK, USA, off the rails with record inequality. I mean, Britain turns out to be more unequal than the USA even, and the USA is pretty unequal. And so what we've had is Brexit in England, where the voters have said that we've had enough of all of you, and we're going to kick you in the ribs. And now we've had the election of Trump. And that really is because of this disgruntled electorate that are well aware they've been ignored, neglected, and cheated, as Marx would have predicted. And so, you know, if you have two parties which did nothing for the working people, in fact made it worse, sent jobs overseas, there was bound to, in the long run, bound to be a reaction. And, you know, so Trump capitalized on that. And so actually, so there's the good part of Marx, which is that he made the working class aware that they were working unpaid extra hours to provide this surplus capital. And so what's the answer there? Well, the one I've always expressed, employee ownership, where the employees receive the surplus capital. And of course this does work because you have employee ownership. For example, John Lewis stores and supermarkets in London, in England, about 100,000 people. Mondragon Associates in Spain, and public supermarkets in Florida. So John Lewis, for example, its surplus capital runs about 15%, and that's what people get roughly every year as a bonus. And of course, if they don't like the management, there's a sort of a democratic system where they can complain. And in Mondragon, in fact, they elect who the CEO is. It's a democratic system. It is not state-run. It's not a totalitarian system. It's run by the working people. It's called democracy, economic democracy. And of course, when you see the complete mess that the capitalists or the top CEOs have made of fine companies in this country, you know, you can say a little bit of employee input from the bottom would have gone a long way. But anybody who's worked in corporate America knows that the people at the top have not a clue as what's going on, because having written, as I did, progress reports, it starts at the bottom, and as it goes up and up, it gets rosier and rosier and rosier, and the bad parts are omitted. So unless the guy at the top comes down and talks to the people at the work face, he never finds out what's going on, and he's too grand to do that. And so that's why when I worked at Xerox, I took Windows and the mouse and everything and gave it to Microsoft, because top management in Xerox didn't think it was any good. So that's what happens when you have people at the top like that. So my observation is that the bourgeoisie, the modern bourgeoisie, are ill-educated dimwits. So long live employee ownership is my prescription. Thank you, gentlemen and ladies. I invite questions. So,
Do you think, do you have,
We've had some.
do we have a mic? There's a mic, okay.
Wait a minute.
I'll tell you what, there's a guy over here who can do it better than I can.
Jim, I can get it going.
Light and display.
Needs more than a light, it's got 2 switches.
Battery's dead, he's having you crazy.
No, the battery's not dead, the switch is just a little kinky.
Yeah, I can handle that.
What's that?
That's
Got a
just
spot that goes
yeah.
on. There you go.
Why did they put the switch down here?
They did that just to bother us. So there's that.
Well, they sure did. John, do you think corruption and greed are endemic to capitalism? Or do you think Marxists and socialists have the same problem?
they all have the same problem. And in fact, Jim and I were discussing on the way over here that the first law of a democracy should be that anybody who's in government cheats us, the penalty should be 5 times what an ordinary citizen should get. Because in fact, these people forget that they're our servants and not our masters. And yes, in fact, we were talking about the corruption in Latin America, corruption in the Middle East. You know, things just, when there's corruption, the bad apple corrupts everything. And, you know, I mean, most people, you know, in life would like a fair deal. But, you know, when there's corruption, I mean, in fact, you know, in India, you have to bribe people to get, you know, anything done. You've got a passport, you can't bribe everyone. You know, it's endemic. And you can't run, you know, you just can't operate under such systems. And so it is important to have a corrupt, honest system. And if an official that we pay for, actually pay their wages, cheats us, I'd put him in jail for a long, long time.
And speaking of which, can you compare Bernie Madoff to John Corzine?
I know both gentlemen, of course, they cheated royally.
Both
right?
of them cheated the people they were responsible.
Absolutely, and the same. Well, look, the biggest cheats are the people that came out with these mortgages, couldn't stand up, and then you have derivatives betting on these things. I mean, the whole thing was fake and corrupt from top to bottom, and almost nobody went to jail over it. And so you have a totally, and the City of London is probably, which is
The worst.
the worst, yeah, it really is. And the City of London, by the way, is an independent government within the city, and they're responsible. In fact, one of the American politicians said, well, the British have lost their empire and haven't discovered their role in the world. Well, the City of London certainly did discover it, which was taking so-called Euro dollars and then loaning it, and now setting up the great tax havens. So in the remnants of the British Empire, I think there's stashed about $30 trillion of ill-gotten gains, operated and managed by the City of London.
Did they operate the LIBOR?
Yeah, that's part of it. Well, the LIBOR is the interest rate, And of course they were fixing that. But again, whenever you deal with the financial system, it's corrupt, top to bottom. Everything is rigged. The price of anything is rigged. What would you expect? And the more you deregulate it, which they demand, I mean, that's why Citibank wanted to have a hand in grabbing and using our deposits in our local bank, because then they have more gambling money. And I wouldn't let them have sixpence myself. But I mean, seriously, this country needs to invest in itself. Education for a start. And it needs to, and as I've said before, rather than spending money cleaning up this ill health caused by this stress and strain of such a system, mental illness, drugs, and so on and so forth. Let's have a proper system that gives everyone a fair chance. Instead of paying people to be unemployed, let's pay people to start businesses. Okay, be productive. We need people. If you're going to operate in the world, you have to come up with new inventions, new ideas. Well, anyone who works for a corporation, I mean, I was brought from England to work on the computer printer, Xerox computer printer. The first printer that printed 8.5 by 11. And I was the manager and got the 1200 working pages second. The next product we had was 97, went 3 times faster, much higher quality. Xerox management sat on that for 3 years. We had it ready to go in engineering. And suddenly when IBM came out with something in Kodak, there must be, so then we got to go with it. I mean, these people at the top, there's nothing between, there's no intellect, it's like to say. I haven't seen it, if it's there, I've never seen it. You must have people, young people usually, that give them money, let them try things. And so what? You're wasting money paying people to be unemployed, let them pay people, people to start business and do things. And so every kid in this country should have a right for a job, actually. But as Marx said, this system creates unemployment, maintains it. And I say the Federal Reserve it controls it. Because when unemployment goes down so low, they'll jack up interest rates.
You mentioned children. We've given away our country so much money to other countries, but I don't know if there's been really proper accounting. When you give away so much money, like giving a child a large sum of money and expecting them to use it, say, within a month or so, and they spend it all within 1 week. I don't think really there's much, especially the IRS now. What are they in? So many thousands, millions of dollars they can't account for.
Well, there is, look, there is the government accounting office and so on and so forth, and there's a, so, as I say, I'm not touting the prudence and the sagacity of any institution, but any institution must be always have an oversight, and it must be an independent oversight. Other countries have so-called ombudsman. So, which is if government does something that you don't like, you can appeal to the, ombudsman and get sorted out. Because, as Lord Acton said, power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And so, people with power and money will always tend to corruption and power, and really, it actually drains the guts out of a country.
And speaking of draining the guts out,
Yes.
In Marx's 10 planks of his manifesto, he has a central bank as one of the planks. Now, to some people, I'm
Sure.
from the question here. To some people, that seems like a philosophical departure from where he should be, and would indicate he was actually in the pocket of the bankers. Can you speak to that?
No, actually, what he meant was, which actually is being proposed in England, is a central credit bank. which would actually, like a central investment bank. Because you do need, I mean, basically what happened after the crash, you had the central bank bailing out the banks. I mean, you know, to the tune of trillions. So my deal is, look, you're going to print money. We need a proper investment bank because it does take capital to do things. And so, as I said, rather than the state paying unemployment to keep people on the dole, pay people to get together, actually a super small business administration, okay, to actually gather people together and say, okay, start businesses, do something productive. If you have an idea, see, we need, you know, in corporations, as I've said, very difficult to sell an idea. No matter how good it is, you know, it's very difficult. You know, I've done it, and oftentimes the ideas that come down are, you know, are pretty stupid. But you know, if you dare to question management at the top, my goodness, you're out the door. So, you know, you must give a chance to for businesses to thrive. And I think every kid, I think there should be apprenticeships, by the way. We do need technical people. Sending everyone to college, you know, Germany doesn't do it, and its manufacturing base has not been destroyed. Yeah, I mean, everybody should be working as much as possible. So here we are throwing you know, almost 10% of the workforce down the drain. Now, you know, you can't afford to do that. And you know, and actually, the ideas and, you know, the wealth of the country comes from the people. That's who creates the wealth. As I said, the surplus capital, Marx said. That's who generates it. And so if you operate under a poor educational system, a poor financial system that doesn't properly fund things, which is, you know, there is no optimum investment in this country, you won't get good results. As I said, I'm a rowing man in 8s. It's almost as if you've got 8 people rowing and two at the back smoking cigars and looking backwards. And you don't have a cox that steers the boat, so you're bound to crash because you don't have a coherent planning system or an enabling, I wouldn't say planning system, but enabling system. Because obviously, many of these businesses that get started, normally in small business, and I wrote a book about small business, called, well, a couple of books, business. Anyway, 4 out of 5 will fail anyway. So that's under the normal course of affairs. So I'd rather the state offer funds to start up business and pay taxes and be productive and try new ideas. Okay, that way, you know, the creativity of people will be realized. So you're realizing the intellectual content of the whole country, and not just a few major corporations, where it's very difficult, as I say, to sell ideas. Very difficult. Because these people, you know, they're at the top, they're given stock options, and the last thing they want to do is risk it, okay? And so, to them, and of course, their idea of the stock option is to, okay, cut costs, okay, pump up the share price, stop research, they'll cash out, because the shares will go up, you know, and they mortgage the future. I mean, it's a, you know, it's a dumb system in my estimation, and it doesn't work.
Question back here.
Yes.
Hello?
Hello.
Just speak up.
Okay, first of all, thank you for this wonderful discussion, because it's something that this is just so appropriate right now. And first, Noam Chomsky has talked a lot about the notion of anarcho-syndicalism, and it's kind of an ownership, a trade unionship, like you say, employee-owned businesses and industries where we're not talking about big government. We're talking, just like you said, about employee ownership and management, and much more democratic.
It's called economic democracy.
Yes,
See, there's people owning the means of, as the yeomen of England did. I gave a talk about that a few weeks ago.
Bernie Sanders has embraced this, and that's just that's a statement. But the real question is, had the revolution happened in an industrialized, like Germany or some other northern, not in the rural areas, might the world be much different had it not happened in Russia?
Well, look, we have suffered under this two totalitarian systems of fascism and communism, and it's been total disaster. See, which is, so, I want to hand the power into the individual people who have an equal say, not these guys, billionaires at the top, who buy politicians, because these people really, when you look at them and what they do, they're not that bright, okay? They really are not. Because actually, they don't have to go to college and beat their brains out, learning Fourier analysis and Lagrange equations and differential equations, stuff that I did. Why would they? I mean, if I were, inherited, $50 million, why would I go beat my brains out in college? I'd have a whale of a time, especially when I was in London, my goodness. In swinging the 60s, my goodness. Why would I study at all?
Okay, another question. Thank you very much. Great talk. Clearly very educated and intelligent. Thank you. If we agree with what you're saying, which I do, and you're an American citizen, and there's only two right-wing parties, like you mentioned, Democrats and Republicans, what do you think we should do?
What to do? Well, I think, to be candid, well, of course, look, there's a failing in the education system. Now, this talk I've just given you is never taught at economic systems in colleges in America, okay? Never. So you only hear this sort of classical economist. Now, so that's like a prescribed education. So I think there is I think with Trump got the diagnosis right, but of course his prescription is, why would you hire your fellow billionaires to run things? Why would they change it? They're doing great as is. It doesn't make sense. And and the quality of these people is putrid. They really are, as well as being vile in some cases. No, so what to do? Okay. I do my little bit. I write books and propaganda a bit. I think all I can say is, I think we're headed, the way we're going, we're headed towards fascism. There's no question about that, okay? When the corporation, and this is what was feared when corporations were first chartered in this country in the 19th century. And they realized when you had this agglomeration of money, gradually it would take over politics and legislation, which is what it's done. And so I think I would hope that we had a near miss in 2008 when things crashed, and we had the 1%, 1% and the 99% business going on. But they did not form into a coherent political power. They seemed to like to protest, but they didn't have any plan. And so I've talked about what I would do, okay, many times. Basically, have a super small business administration that creates employee ownership, you know, with a bank, and the capital would come via bonds. I mean, you know, you know what a bond is. I mean, you loan money at a certain interest rate, and that would be backed up by the government. But of course, you have just see what you're doing now. You're keeping you have a population that you can, you know, with opioid epidemic, you can see the hurt and the damage that's being done to a huge class of people, okay, who feel, actually they feel power, and they are powerless. Basically, they're ignored and kind of thrown on the scrap heap. And so they turn to drugs, you got ill health, mental illness, and that's a huge cost to this country. I mean, apart from the huge trade deficit, the cumulative trade deficit is something like 20 trillion. And of course, we've had to pay for that by selling them assets, on top of which we've given away intellectual property, which is a sign of madness. You know, I'd like to have the people that have done this here. And I'd like to think, what on earth were you thinking, you know? My book, you should read my book, Sabotaging America. I think it has been sabotaged by these idiots, these lame, ill-educated nitwits that have run this country into the ground. And both parties are complicit. I mean, I couldn't bring myself to vote for Hillary, or any of them, actually. I would like a party to have a coherent plan about what they would do. They can ask my advice if they want. But really, the power comes from a well-functioning population who's well-fed, has proper health care, and proper education. And it has a financial system that funds business, growth, and so on in a country. And you don't have that now. You have an education system that costs so much, the poorest sector, where many of their brains are, can't afford it. And most people can't afford proper health care. You know, it's an ongoing disaster. And to say that, you know, that either party has a plan to solve all these problems, it's what I said at the beginning, that Marx talked about, it's socio-economics. The two are intertwined. You can't just run blindly and say, oh, we have supply, demand, and everything works out. Well, it doesn't work. You have to worry about the human element. And that's what Keynes talked about, you know. Yes, yes.
Hi. I enjoyed your talk, and I have two questions. One question is about the gold standard. You mentioned if there's the gold standard still operating, there wouldn't be a market crash?
No. Well, there wouldn't be a trade deficit, because under a gold standard, you settle your debts in gold. And gold is finite. So what happens is, you actually, in a way, you control the value of your currency, gold. And so you just can't run a permanent trade deficit with a gold standard. I gave a talk about this, and it takes a while to explain it, but under a gold standard, you can't run it. Now, the problem with the gold standard is, gold is finite, so how do you have a growing GDP, you know, with a finite amount of gold? You know, that's the problem with the gold standard. Now, Keynes, I'll drink a little bit more, he proposed an international currency called the Bancor. Bancor is bank gold, see, bank gold. That would actually, I've talked about this before, he proposed this at Bretton Woods, 1944, and it was rejected by the Americans. Naturally, they knew best, you see. And the British didn't, of course.
The second question is, have you heard about I think it's called Universal Minimum Payment, UMI?
Yes, that's...
Is that concept being practiced in Northern Europe? How do you evaluate that concept?
To me, that's just a prop to prop up the existing system. It's like having a super welfare state. I would rather use that money to fund startup business so everyone's working and being productive. So such a system is like a band-aid, really. Because actually, I mean, when you know that a waitress earns basic wage $2.13 an hour, and it's made up by tips, you know. And when of course the working week is shut down from 40 hours to 32 hours, so these companies can avoid paying benefits and so on and so forth, you know, it's gone off, you know. It's you know, it's a, what can you say? It's an immoral system, in my judgment, when that happens. But you see, that in this state especially, right to work means effectively right not to work, actually.
Exactly.
So, you know, so anyway, sorry, Mary Faye, you have to speak, get the microphone on. If it works.
She's got it right back.
Oh, you're next, sorry.
Okay, thank you for the talk.
There's a more closer.
Speak up.
Yeah, thank you for the talk. Now, I was just wondering, so what would be a good government system for us to have? Because, I mean, it seems like...
Parliamentary system.
Because, I mean, you can say all you want that the people that are running the country are idiots, but I think they're intentionally running it into the ground. So, I mean, so they're probably smarter than we think they are, but... Is it the system itself that's corrupt, or is it just the people that are running it? Because if you had people that were running any type of government that were actually humane and benevolent and conscientious, the government structure would be different.
What has happened is that both parties have been complicit in allowing basically the capital base of the country to be exported. Now, in fact, you've got, well, a collection of greedy, immoral dimwits, really. Take your pick. But I mean, when Reagan came in and announced what he was going to do 30 odd years ago, I said this is what is going to happen. Okay? It was obvious to me, but it was not obvious to the what I call the proletariat class who loved Reagan. I mean, it was a bit. Never mind. No, you need an educated population, and you need. All I can say is, this system you've got a 20 trillion, a cumulative $20 trillion trade deficit, plus a huge federal deficit now, especially under Trump. You know, it's not workable. Okay, obviously it doesn't work. You have so many social problems. And I think that's why Trump was elected. And people got so fed up, they said, well, we'll try any idiot, basically, and they got one. Because I think they were in despair. And I would certainly despair of both parties as they stand today. Even they don't have a proper plan. I mean, look, I was head of, in Xerox. I had a plan to get the damn product out the door. So we met, we wrote the plan, everybody knew what they were doing. We had a plan. Every country should have a plan. Seems to me makes sense. But there is no plan. I mean, the free market, so-called, doesn't work. It's a crass. Well, on its own admission, it is not. Supply demand, doesn't work. There's no such thing, actually. I gave a talk about that as well. So he missed all the best by saying. Anyway,
Do you have a question?
Very fair.
John, what would you think about something like the WPA for people who are not college material, fixing the infrastructure?
Well, the problem there is it's a stopgap system. It's not like this social wage that you pay people. It's a palliative because the capitalist system has failed, basically. It's not providing enough, basically enough demand. I mean, it's a deficiency of demand. Therefore, artificially, the government then creates the demand by creating government programs, which is nothing wrong in itself. In fact, as you get to San Antonio is a prize example. That Riverwalk is lovely. That was created by WPA, and you know, so good things can happen. But I'd rather that be done by creating. I'd like to see groups of people go down to the SBA and say, "I have an idea." You know, I've spoken to my company about it. They don't want to know, and I have my plan, and I need certain people. I need salespeople, I need accountants, I need a couple of engineers, you know, I need some funding and blah, blah, blah. And they say, fine, go ahead. You know, and so we are creating businesses. And hopefully they'll compete in the world. They'll outcompete Germany, outcompete Korea. So we'll have our, you know, American technology again. And I don't care what the business, I mean, a guy could have a window washing business, that's all I care, but at least it's, you know, and so they buy him a mop and a pail and whatever, you know, at the simplest level, but it's that idea that every kid should have a, I mean, back in the 50s in England, you know, everybody was working. I mean, it worked. You had factories on the Great Cambridge Road. You know, when my sister lived up there, everyone went to work. It was 1% unemployment. It can be done. It can be done. I saw it being done.
Well, John, I have a question about
Yes.
the recovery after World War II there in England.
Right.
And one of the big critiques of socialism and Marxist theory in general is you always end up using other people's money. Whose money was used for those recovery programs?
Commercial plan.
Well, look, in actual fact, right after the war, because we were tied to the American system, this is well before the Marshall Plan. Okay, well before the Marshall Plan. We were tied to this system devised by Harry Dexter White in 1944 with a fixed currency of $35 an ounce of gold and all the other currencies tied to it. Now, at that time, Britain was still running the reserve currency of the world. And so it had to fund the whole sterling area. It also still had armies and dependencies. It had to run a trade surplus to pay for that. And so right after the war, mostly all the goods we were producing, and by the way, the industrial capacity was, you know, pretty much worn out and many of it demolished, okay? So the British people were working their guts out to create this, which they did do, by the way. There was a surplus. Now the biggest madness of all was Britain decided, the Labour government decided, to go in with the Americans and take 15% of their GDP to pay for the Korean War effort. Okay? 15% of the GDP. Now, to me that was madness, okay? I mean, if America wanted to go and fight communism, I would have said, great. We simply, you know, no. So, and so actually, if you see films about Germany in the late 50s, everything's brand new there. I mean, because the Americans decided to wipe, 1953, they said, Germany, all your debts are wiped out. All debts are wiped out. That's what they said. Now, it's the Marshall Plan. Actually, what happened was, of course, the world wanted American goods. It didn't have the money to buy them. And so even though America, in all the arrangements by FDR in were under Lend-Lease and Bretton Woods and so on, that Britain would open up its markets, it's no use opening up your markets, as they had to do, if the people in the markets don't have any money to pay for it. And so part of that agreement, the Marshall Plan, was that every country, like France, had to take so much percentage of American films, okay, and so on and so forth. Because actually the worry was that after the Second World War, there would be a mighty crash, okay, of the whole economy. And so this was a way of actually keeping the American, by giving people money to buy American goods, it kept American factories working. And that was like a 3 years experiment, you know, what, I think it's 49 to 51, I think it was. Now, as I said, well before that, we had to maintain that surplus, which we did. And this is why, in fact, because the Labour government was in power, and amidst all of this, brought in the welfare state, the population said, we had enough of this. I mean, it was so severe. It was worse. Those years after were worse than during the war.
Wow, wow.
And I lived through it, and so, yeah.
We have another question over here.
When the Founding Fathers wrote the Constitution, I think they set up a brilliant system. However, at that time, the population was probably, what, a 30th or a 50th or maybe a 100th of what it is today. And we had New England town hall meetings where people monitored what's going on in government. Well, look at the city of Dallas. Not one person in this room knows anything about what even the city hall is doing. We can't monitor a population this big. We can't control the government in the same way. And to give you an example, Congress passed laws against insider trading, so it's a crime to do insider trading. However, they passed other laws making it totally legal for themselves to do it. And just as an example, from what I have read, this is an example of nearly all of them, Nancy Pelosi in her first 2 years in Congress increased her net worth by $10 million. That's insider trading. Now, what can we do to get control of government again, and why do you think a parliamentary system is better?
Okay. There are several reasons why a parliamentary system is better. Firstly, the system that was copied by the Founding Fathers was the system that was in place in 1688, okay? Where a monarch was brought over from Holland, and he could create his own cabinet at the approval of Parliament. Well, over 3 centuries, the British system has evolved. There is a cabinet, but the Queen has no power, or the King has no power. The cabinet is the cabinet of ministers under the Prime Minister, who is elected, okay? And each of the cabinet is a member of Parliament, has to be elected. So you have elected people. You don't have people walking off the street, you know, who friends of friends and wealthy and know nothing about anything. And basically what you've got is an unelected or an elected king with a cabinet, right? You know, and he could be a total dimwit, and we've seen that. Now, under a British system, you can't have that. It's not possible. The Prime Minister must be elected by his party. So, and is served in Parliament for years and years. The other aspect, a parliamentary election only lasts about 4 or 5 weeks at most. You just can't spend that amount of money. That it doesn't take, you know, multiple, and what was it, 2 billion it cost for, you know, the Obama and the last election. You know, you just can't spend that amount of money. So the corruption is not nearly as bad. Also, you know, so you don't have this situation where, you know, a member of Parliament is going to spend half his time, you know, canvassing for money, making promises, you know, to enact legislation that's going to help the person that's giving him the money. And that is corruption. And I think it's this system, this 300-year-old system that America copied, you know, which is, in no other country in the world has it. And as I said before, if you go to Australia, South Africa, and so on and so forth, they've inherited the parliamentary system, the legal system, even the judges might not wear wigs and so on. I mean, this is what Britain bequeathed. Now, America knew better. Well, it really did. Because this system, I think, is set up for corruption. And it is corrupt. And you're right, it is corrupt. It's what Marx said about, you know, the competitive capitalist system. It just eats itself. You know? And this system just eats itself as well, because it's set up to be corrupt, and it is corrupt. We agree. But that's the way it works.
Do any more questions?
I think there's one more here. I have a fundamental objection. I don't know whether you want to call me an anarcho-capitalist or how you want to class me, but I don't like being called a worker. I don't like being called proletariat. And I would put it to you for your answer that, in fact, I don't really like any of this classing of people in groups where all I see out there are individuals.
Well, you know, that actually, you know, this notion of the rugged American and the strong individual is nice if you don't have the multi-trillion corporations in the other corner. And I'm afraid the poor muscled individual. You know, what I would say is what I chatted to Jim about. Remember, it's the individual that's supposed to be, you know, okay, to quote Abraham Lincoln at Gettysburg Address, he said, it should be a government of the people, for the people, by the people, okay? Now, that is what it should be, but it isn't, and we all know it. And I think, yes, you can flex your muscles and say I'm a rugged individual, but unless you get together with others, okay, and form a coherent plan, okay, and you know, I'm afraid that the fact of the matter is, as I said, it's the analogy is like a rowing team. You win by pulling together. Now, of course, the 1% will always divide and conquer. I mean, it's an age-old trick. And say, oh, well, you're rugged. I mean, you don't need to join a union. You don't, you know. This is one of the big American myths about it. You know, America is a land, you know, a land of myths, really.
Actually, John, I never said, in fact, my next question was going to be, you haven't said enough about unions. You talk about the Labour Party in Britain, but over here, unions have been a useful check and balance against the very things you talk about.
Actually, I do not agree. You see, unions are really a reaction to, in fact, so it was actually the proletariat did agglomerate and form unions. My objection is there should be no need for unions. If you have employee ownership, okay, they are, in fact, the proletariat become the bourgeoisie, okay, they control their own boat, okay, and I think it's, to me, it makes sense. I think it would work a lot better. You would avoid a lot of social problems and so on. You would have more equality along the lines of the Nordic countries, which lead the world in the socio-economic outcomes. So, yeah. So I think this notion of individualism is great. I mean, we are all individuals, but a team, a team is more than the sum of the individuals, really. And of course, it's actual by grouping together and discussing. Well, I can speak here all along, but I ran a team of, 1.3 people. I would tell them, look, if I'm doing wrong, come and tell me, because, I'm certainly, somewhat educated, but I don't know everything, and I made that plain, So it's better to work together as a team, and that way you'll win. But when you get so divisive, and this is what we've seen in especially in the last year, hatred and, this killing of people, it's awful. And you can't imagine that this country can carry on like this. I can't. So individualism is great, but you'll never get anywhere as an individual. You have to combine together with a plan that is coherent and makes sense, really.
Another question over there.
Yeah.
Kind of somewhere in between. All sheep are individuals too, but they taste the same.
I would say they get duped the same, actually. What I would say.
Any more questions?
All right, so I'm surrendering the floor.
Well, I think you can see Jim is ready to go, right? Thank you, John, very, very much for your presentation tonight. Really enjoyed it. And I think it's very relevant. I've stood up and spoke on this particular topic in response to John's presentation before, but I'll do it again tonight. Let me tell you, just some of you are perhaps first timers. I've not seen you before, so I'll tell you a little bit about where I'm coming from. I'm a 4.5-year retired CPA, economist, historian by education, and I worked in different forms of government. Small companies, big corporations with thousands of shareholders, and I had the wonderful, irreplaceable privilege of working in the setting that John described to me tonight. And I'll just say this to reinforce that. I worked for a company that was founded by two guys up in Chicago. And they decided, well, gee whiz, I don't think we're going to live to infinity. So what are we going to do with this company? Are we going to sell it to some strangers and think they're going to maintain it? I think we might want to figure out a way to transfer ownership to the employees who actually give a flip about the company. So they set up an ESOP, employee stock ownership plan, within about a year of the time that we authorized that. What a wonderful plan. It totally changed our perspective on working with the company. We had good jobs, we made good money, we had no big complaints, or we would have left, right? But we loved getting those quarterly reports. The company up in Chicago would do an annual financial assessment of the net worth of the company. Since it was privately owned, nobody was out trading it on the exchange, and they would value it every year. In a period of 5 years, that went from $2.27 to $25.50. If you just had a few shares, that added up to a nice little chunk of change in your pocket. And so, needless to say, we were able to buy out the original two founding shareholders. We put all the stock in the hands of the employees. We gave everybody Blue Cross. We paid 100% for it with no deductibles. Can you imagine? in today's day and time, good Lord have mercy. We had a wonderful health care plan. I did my last child under that, I do believe. But I didn't use an awful lot. But we had, in other words, because we were us, we owned the company, our group that we appointed made the decisions for the company. We had no animosity toward the company, unless we might disagree with Susan or Harry who voted to do such and such. That's possible, yeah. But for the most part, we worked in tow. So this is my political statement about that. We have a certain amount of that in the United States today. We have a number of companies that operate under ESOPs. One of the classic examples here in Dallas is the Stewart companies. Has anybody ever heard of the Stewart company? They're sort of nobodies because they distribute heating, ventilating, air conditioning systems. I think they're up in Karl's on a farmer's ranch. Been there forever. They set up an ESOP years ago, experienced exactly the same result that I described to you. And it has the ability, see, to carry on forever and ever. Most of the time, the ESOP has a provision in the plan that says, when you leave the company in X period of time, it might be 2 years, the plan has the option to buy any shares you prefer or offer to the plan at what the last value placed on it by the company in Chicago. So if it's $42 a share, you sell out in July, you get $42 a share. So they put a lot of provisions in there that worked very well, carried the company forward. If I were the king of the United States of America, which obviously is not a kingdom, I think I would put a plan like that in place as a requirement for all companies. If you want to do business in the United States, you do it that way. Now, some people would find a lot of fault with that. I'm an anti-regulationist. Good Lord, I don't know how I can even say that. But the small company who I've done tons of work with that has, say, 1 to 25 employees will all say, almost in unison and lockstep, they would stand up here and tell you, we cannot afford to do that and be in business. And to an extent, they are correct. To another extent, however, if everybody has to do it, then it's like paying the employer side of Social Security tax and Medicare tax. It's not an option, you have to. You're required to do it. If everybody is required to do it, then you're not going to be forced by granting your employees long-term benefits of that sort over your competitors, right? Your competitors have to do it too. So if we all do it, then who benefits from that? The employees, just like John says. And the company benefits from it secondarily because I can't tell you how many times working in that environment you would come up with an idea that you might just go home and talk to your spouse about or flip it and forget it. But you'd go sit down and talk to the manager at the local office you worked in. It would filter its way up to Chicago. And if it was a good idea, it'd be put in place. It was for all of our benefits. It wasn't the company profiting off of us. It was us profiting off of us. So, while I'm not a communist, I'm not a socialist by any stretch of the imagination, I can see and I've experienced the benefits of putting all your pennies in the basket and everybody getting a little share certificate back out that says, we own the company. It absolutely works. And what John has told you is, I don't care if it just sounds like political rhetoric or not, I don't think it does, but if you choose to take it that way, I think it's a mistake because we need to make some changes in our economy to make it work better. We could be the number one country in the world right now, which we are, but there are an awful lot of people out there who are, compared to right after World War II, the decade after World War II, they are far better educated, they have more money in the bank, they have more guts to get out in the market and work, They replaced most of the equipment in plants and factories in Europe that we bombed out and destroyed. They have newer plants that work more efficiently than our plants, which were never bombed out, right?
Right.
That's a simple statement. It doesn't take a genius to figure that out. We sit over here in the United States, nobody drops bombs on us except at Pearl Harbor. It shoots a few torpedoes at us. So we were undamaged by the war. We made a tremendous amount of money right after the war. Everybody wants to talk about it as being caused by blah, 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 blah. It wasn't caused by anything except for the fact that we went over to Europe and over to Japan and we dropped bombs like crazy and we destroyed their industry. So you remember what the first products that came over here from Japan looked like?
Yep.
Something you go down to Woolworth and buy.
Exactly.
Junk product. Now, if you go buy a Honda or a Toyota or a, what's the third one? Nissan, Subaru. You add up all the service costs for those vehicles and compare them to the Ford, Chrysler, Chevy, GM products in the United States, world of difference. Those guys know how to build cars, and they're fantastic at it. And we provided the opportunity for a lot of that. Even after a war occurred, can you imagine somebody coming over and bombing your military base, and then you can go over and help them rebuild their country and refund it and make it work again?
Hey, Jim.
Yeah. Amen?
Amen.
Amen.
5 minutes.
Well, I've started off into a sermon, so forgive me, please. But I do, John's suggestion to you is not political rhetoric BS. It is reality. It relies on human nature. And it is one of the most wonderful things we could do in our country to make it a better, more profitable, more involved. You are more involved in an employee stock ownership plan than if your company creates a profit sharing plan and it puts the exact same amount of money in that profit sharing plan, and the only thing you ever see is a little statement at the end of the year that says you have blah blah in your profit sharing account. That's psychological. But when you know you're a shareholder in a company and you own 0.5% of the company, and your decisions cause the profits to go up or down, you think different, and you work different, you act different, and it's all mostly better. Thank you.
Well, whenever John talks, even for a short time, I usually have something in the way of a rebuttal to offer. And I think one of the things we're missing with Marxism, and I was bringing it up in a question, but I'll emphasize it more now, it's really individualism versus collectivism. And it's a mindset, and this does go back to the Hegelian dialectic, which maybe John can go into exactly what that is when he gets back up here, because you've got problem, reaction, solution. I mean, there's some real dynamics there that have been used for a lot of evil and mischief in the world. And also one of the things that kind of got glossed over, in any time you're talking about Karl Marx, I think you have to talk also about the fruits of Karl Marx and the fact that the very war, that the Second World War that we supposedly won at Yalta, half of Europe, Eastern Europe, got plunged into the profound tyranny of socialism there, and had to suffer under that system. And then we have luminaries like Alexander Solzhenitsyn, who wrote prodigiously about all of the evils of that system and how it corrupted the minds of men, and you know, the corruption in the supposed utopian system. Now, there's a good argument that corrupt capitalism doesn't look much different. It certainly doesn't look much different right now. That's why I've really been, you know, more silent than I might have been in questioning you, because we have a corrupt system right now. And but if I look to what I would say are my own luminaries, I'm looking to Ludwig von Mises in contrast to Keynes. And von Mises' challenge that he presented to socialism in his book he wrote called Socialism had to do with the pricing. How do you go in a controlled society, how do you decide pricing? And he goes through and shows all the permutations of how things go wrong and how it gets worse and worse when government is trying to decide what the market does a very good job deciding. And I would say, in the case of ESOPs, in the case of all these different systems, this may be a good system, but let the market decide. If you have successful ESOPs, I hope they kick the butt of a lot of these corporations who are, being run from the top down. I know when I was running a small business, it was literally like the Wild West. And I don't know how, running a small business, you could have had employee ownership at that phase, because I don't think employee ownership could have handled the gymnastics I had to go through in the 20-hour-long days and everything. Running that business, all the different problems I had to deal with as an entrepreneur. Once you have a business which has a fairly secure market, and you don't have competition which is breaking every law that they don't allow you to break, then perhaps you can have an ESOP and have them, but it's got to be a stable situation. So I applaud the cases where you have owners going to an ESOP, and it's great, but trying to implement that as a structure of law or something, I think you're headed the wrong way. One of the main problems with the whole Marxist socialist plan is the amount of force it takes to implement and manage it is phenomenal, because you have to have all this. You basically got to dictate who gets what supplies, all these different things. I mean, and then you have, the bread lines where, people are wasting what could be productive time standing there for toilet paper. I mean, it really ends up being a recipe for poverty. It's not what Marx intended. Trotsky was a little bit more intelligent in his writings about the communist plan. He actually stated that you needed a highly developed capitalist society to have the infrastructure to implement each according to, and from each according to their abilities, to each according to their needs and so forth, that took a very highly complex capitalist society as a basis to then have the kind of socialism that Trotsky envisioned. And I would put it to everybody here that we have been being slow-walked into socialism and into communism for decades. And we have it all around us, and we just don't really see it, and we don't name it. The problem I have is that it's really about divesting the individual of individual property rights and individual choices. And that's hidden. It's not something you see. It's not, I mean, it's kind of like you get kind of shoved even by, like market forces or something. You don't realize what's happening.
Next.
Well, I got to integrate the diversity.
All right. Diversity. Bring it on.
Well, John, I enjoyed what you said. But the gentleman that asked your question back kind of was, you wasn't ready to prepare for that one. But there are a number of paradigms that you talk about where stock ownership or where employees participate in the profits. And if you have such a plan, then you don't have labor problems because you don't have to worry about people doing what they're supposed to do because they have a vested interest, they have a stake in it, and you have that. So that's one of the things. The gentleman was talking about the two political parties don't seem to be working. It's not a great deal of difference. You have a difference in rhetoric, but not in substance. And how do we deal with those? And there's the political system that needs a fix. I think we have the paradigms, but the large multinational corporation, they aren't going to go for the stock ownership and stuff. They want all the profit themselves. But if you have the right political system, it creates an environment where incentive is for them to do it. And I think my take, I think the individual, as described years ago, they may have, if they own a piece of land, they could be individuals. But you can own a piece of land, you can't do nothing with it right now. This thing is different, more complicated. And basically, you can train for a job and apply for a job, or you can go in business and you may fail. And all those things there. Our political system is messed up. I observed the election this year in this country for this mid-year election. And I just forced myself to look at some of the political rhetoric that's on the media. If people use that to make decisions, they're in a terrible shape.
Amen.
Because most of it is not true. It's just demonizing people. It ought to be illegal for a person to get out of there politically and say something's untrue. I don't think that's a big deal. They could do that, and that would help solve the problem. Like you said, Lincoln's definition of democracy is government by the rich, for the rich, and of the rich. That's what it is right now. And individuals, we just trying to hustle to get a job and try to stay afloat. And the other thing you talked about, I agree with, is education. And it's been a long time ago. In the 1960s, my generation was pretty rebellious, with good reasons. And now we're old, like I am. so we did what I expected in 1960 didn't happen. And I'm afraid I didn't even train my children for some of the things that's happening right now that seem to be going in reverse rather than move forward. And I think we do need to be educated. But being educated, they pointed out a study in '60 that the people in the social sciences are taught to be creative, analyze, and think. Even if you train as an engineer, it's narrow but very in-depth. At my undergraduate college, they required them to take history and economics to try to get them out of the block. And if you're a great scientist or a great doctor, you have the same problem. But how do you train someone to be, broader and based in that? That's the problem. Like someone said, we don't teach economics a great deal, and people don't learn nothing about history. But then we stop doing the same thing over and over again.
Right.
So we had that kind of education.
Amen.
And then actually, in the early days, when they talked about our system in America, it was supposed to be based on reason and logic. And the founders felt that the average person didn't have enough sense to vote, so that's why you had to be white, male property owners to vote.
Right.
And we have to, if we're going to have a representative democracy, people got to be trained, they got to understand the political system, they got to be able to discern when someone is telling you the truth or not. One of the big problems we have now, I think, is hate, fear, and misunderstanding.
Yep.
We got to deal with that for us to come together and try to solve the problems. So I think if we come up with these other systems, we have all kind of paradigms. All those companies are doing extremely well, and that I know of. And but to change the system, one of the things the president has right now, with our 21 trillion debt, and the money that we borrowed from China. I don't know whether tariffs is a good idea or not. We can't go back and just start brand new. We got to deal with the issue, the commitments we have. We got to work through that, and that's much more difficult than what you think. Thank you.
I learned an awful lot tonight. I have no information to give you as far as the specific topic because that's not my background, but I wanted to say what someone commented about the U.S. giving money to other countries, and I heard a speaker recently say that the United States does not give money to other countries without there being some investment in it for our country. Just something I heard. And economy taught in the schools, true, it's not. But we used to have a bank. One school, they hit and miss here and there. One school I was in, the bank came out and talked to the kids and let them start up a little account. And this was a high poverty area. Just, let them start an account there. And once, when I had a portable building in the early childhood science lab, we had a store. And we let them come in and buy little pencils, erasers, and all kinds of stuff. This is really poverty children that are not used to being able to even buy anything. So it is very, almost non-existent, as you said, economy being taught. And my interest was piqued by John's comment about being called a worker. It reminded me, like, in mental diagnoses, people don't like to be called by a certain diagnosis. And it was explained that academic terms like this are used for purposes of discussion. And it doesn't mean that the worker is not an individual and not valued. It's for academic, labels are put on things for terms of academic discussion. And I guess that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Leo?
Okay.
John, is that you, John?
Okay, I'll wrap up. Well, I thank you for all your comments. They came from the usual sources. Actually, I was not advocating communism or state-controlled socialism, but what I will say is there is such a thing as the economy of scale. And where you have a monopoly, like the Dallas water, okay, that's a monopoly, and it makes sense actually to have it publicly owned, actually, owned by the state, in other words. So there are many things that do work. For example, I think Social Security is an example of one that works, okay? It's being underfunded, and of course we expect it to be cut to pay for the tax cut for the 1% soon, okay? As a reward for their good works. I think my point was that rather than being an individual's problem, I think the real problem is individuals don't count in this country, okay? They have no say in this country. And my point is this, is that I think everybody is entitled to have a say, okay? Everyone, for example, one of the problems of the high and mighty, in the Primrose Alley, at the top corporate level, is they never go down and talk to the actual people at the coalface, okay? Who knows what's going on? You know, you must have a conversation with, you know, with people, okay? Now, I agree with Albert, you know, how do you have a town hall meeting in such large organizations? Well, you know, I used to have group meetings, you know, and I'd go around and say, you know, look, everyone is free to speak their mind, you know. What's your suggestion? For example, that was just, you know, the way I operated. And as I said, you know, so I think individuals must count. They are important because they're the ones that create ideas. And you must have a situation that encourages that. Which, you know, now, funny enough, in England, we like oddballs. We like, you know, we don't like uniformity, okay? I mean, when I came to this country, one of the things that astounded me was this idea of peer pressure, where this group, you know, gangs up and, you know, wants people to be like them. Well, in my school, there was no such thing as peer pressure. We were, you know, we're known to be sarcastic. Our weapons were words. So in growing up in London, you always had to have your answer ready, you know. And there was none of this uniformity, pressuring people to wear the same clothes and all the rest of it. I mean, you know, with the latest, we want people to be individualistic, okay? We want people to be creative. Now, when you have a system like, you know, we should have free education, okay, paid for by the state. You know, it can be improved. And you know, the reason Calvin, why I didn't reply fully to the question, because if I were to stand here and give you my full plan, which I could do, it would take about 2 hours, okay? And in fact, when I wrote my book, Sabotaging America, Bill Borden, with, you know, my friend, you know, Don and Juno, they know quite well. When we got to the part and I began to talk about what I would do, Bill said, we can't put this in. You know, my friend would never agree to any of this. So I watered it down, actually, a lot, okay? But basically, I mean, yes, my center point is the individual, actually, where I do believe that we must rely upon individual creativity. That's what we must foster. We must never do anything that stifles. We must have an educational system that brings and welcomes individuals, okay? Welcomes people to be different, okay? Because our people are different. You know, we all have different genes. We all have different talents. You know, my job as a manager was to make sure everyone was successful. And I mean, the only job of government, in my opinion, is to make every American a success. That's its only job. Now, if it runs a system where you make 1% a success and bugger everybody else, that's not a successful system. And that's what we have. That's what we have. It needs a change in mindset, okay? Now, the ideas you propose are fostered and promoted by the 1%. They like to hear this rug Americans, you know, and fighting each other, you know, in the pit. No, they love that. And you know, the other favorite thing is there, you know, you have the poor. Well, there's the deserving poor and the undeserving poor, okay? So you have one class of poor. Oh, I go to work and I'm paying my money for these people who are idle, okay? Who drive Cadillacs to the welfare office and blah blah blah, okay? Well, yeah, it was Reagan, that was a wonderful, kind-hearted person. No, I want everyone who can work to work. And I have a system that creates it. And I can give another talk about my plan, what I really would do, okay? And I've hinted it here and there in the past. But it really does mean individuals do count, they are important, and we must have a system that brings out all their talents that we use, because we need all their talents. We need people to speak up, say, just like here, everyone is getting us to speak, there's no, you know, there's no animosity, you know. In fact, I like the diversity, really, I do. As I said to Tom, I like it, you know, because I think it's useful to hear other people's views, and everyone defends their position. That's great. That's what democracy, because none of us knows everything, you know. We'd like to, I'd like to, you know, not possible. So we all have to live with our deficiencies as best we can and put up with it and do the best we can in this world. But for God's sake, let's try and help each other a bit more and stop this name calling and all this divisive nonsense that goes on. I mean, it's appalling, really, to reach this state. And, you know, let's have some just common decent humanity about things. You know, and perhaps we can leave this world a better place, you know, after we've gone, really. And you know, so yes, John, I do believe in individuals. I think it's, you know, should be promoted, but we must have a system that fosters that, really, wholeheartedly. Anyway, that's my piece for tonight. I thank you for coming. I hope you've learned a few things. I hope you've been entertained with it. I promise to come again.
Come ahead, John. You first, just again.